Curiosity figures in historical and modern science, such as Galileo's motion studies. Trust in curiosity, essential to the investigatory science, is a grounding for democracy in the analysis of philosopher John Dewey that we heard about already. In aspiring toward democracy, Dewey advocated an education that supports learners in pursuing curiosity, investigatively, and collaboratively. In response to Piaget and Dewey, I look to trust curiosity as a means of learning. In the seminar that I teach at MIT, investigations arise as students consider their own observations alongside materials from historical science and philosophy. The methodology of Piaget and Inhelder, adapted by Eleanor Duckworth in the research pedagogy of critical exploration in the classroom, provides the neutral, safe conditions for learners and me as the teacher. Am I blocking it? Should I move over here? It's better. Yeah. These experiences bring us together with historical companions in wonderment and learning. Each term, class experiences evolve differently and interactively among the students and me. Today, I'm relating from my recent class of graduate students. We observed the sky, we worked with the astrolabe, a historical instrument, and we discussed readings from ancient astronomy to the 20th century. We explored electrostatic effects described by Gilbert, Gray, and others. We discussed Dewey and Piaget, and we created experiments in response to their writings. Inspired by seeing marbled paper in a historical book, we experimented doing paper marbling ourselves. The class themselves did reading aloud enactments that they selected from Galileo's dialogue, Brecht's play Galileo, and a passage from Marquet, 100 Years of Solitude. I'm excited to share one class activity that began with history today and another that began with philosophy. In each case, a classroom activity that I did not expect arose. I encouraged the investigation in the moment. In subsequent class sessions, I supported further extensions of these experiences. For each of the two examples, history and philosophy, I will introduce a brief video excerpt, and the video will have transcript in English of the main spoken words and photos included in the video. These class recordings bring us into the voices, perplexity, and wonder by which the students discover and express curiosity. Awakening curiosity, encouraging its expression, and sustaining it through whatever may arise in the course of an investigation is a dynamic process. The teacher is together with the students in discovering their curiosity and seeking ways for its development and action. What emerges bears out the educational productivity of trusting curiosity. My first example involves historical astronomy. At the very first class, I placed on the table 4 historical science instruments that the students have never seen before. I invited students to investigate these instruments, which were unknown and provocative to them. Among these was the metal disc, the girl on the bottom there. It was marked with divisions and something that turned. The students conjectured it was a way to find north. Everyone gathered around it at our next session. It was the astrolabe. I had several of them. On that occasion, at our next session, we had a guest, my former student, the architect Francesca Leone, and she involved us in an exhibit there's a little bit of it on the right, and a poster that she had created on the astrolabe. So now we come to the following class meeting, the third class. I arranged for the class to visit the school archives to view 3 early printings of a medieval work, Sacrobosco's On the Sphere. These three early printed works. The illustrations and historical volumes evoked curiosity from 2 students who were there in the class, Summer and Gary. Seeing people standing variously on an earth within a star sphere, in this picture in the book, Summer, my student who was an education student from Harvard and from China, will express her deep wonderment that ancient people realized the sky was the same in China and Europe. Touching the historical pages was awesome for her. Gary, who was a student in MIT's advanced study program, asked, did ancient China have analogs to the constellations? In later class sessions, we viewed star charts of ancient China, such as this one, and we learned about the indigenous representation of Orion, shown here among the peoples of the Philippines, from our classmate, TJ. Summer gasped at the beauty of these end papers in the Sacrobosco book, and her delight in the beauty inspired me to develop a later session where we made these marbled papers ourselves. There were 2 illustrations in the Sacrobosco book that really interested my students, and one of them was this, the frontispiece. Summer exclaimed, "A god hand revolves the universe like a toy." The sun's path in this universe is depicted as a tilted band that I colored here in red. And that red band shows, in this diagram, this is the second diagram that they respond to, which is 2-dimensional. So now, so we explained about the students seeing the old books in the rare book library, and we had a 2-hour class, so we went back to the classroom, and in the classroom that afternoon, the student Gary brought out a big piece of paper. It came from his previous class, and it was marked with a spirograph machine. He spoke about how the diagram that he had made in the other class reminded him of astronomical geometry. And that gave me the idea that we could do something I hadn't thought of before. Maybe we could try to make ourselves some version of what we had seen in the rare book library with the Sacrobosco diagrams. I just thought of that in the moment. So I gathered potential materials while Gary and Summer discussed the digital photos I had of the 2 diagrams in the rare books that they were interested in. Summer and Gary developed the project of going from the sphere of the one diagram, which had the god in it, to the flat plane of the other. Rubber bands encircling a styrofoam ball served as the equator for the sphere and for the position of the zodiacal band. Summer will dab oil paint on the ball's zodiacal band. She initiated the idea to apply this paint in 4 equal parts of alternating color and then in 12 parts. Rolling the the ball so that its rubber band equator followed along a penciled line on a paper evoked suspense. How would the paint on the ball appear on the paper? Gary interpreted the figure that showed up as the year, and its crossings with the pencil line were the equinoxes, and then there was the solstice, summer and winter, at the peak and the dip of this curve that they created. Saying that he was surprised by the globe in our class that showed the Earth's tilt, Gary then proposed to place the zodiacal band, the path of the sun, at a yet more extreme angle for another experiment that he proposed. To this curiosity of Gary's, Summer proposed to place the paint dots at 12 equal positions around the diameter of the zodiacal band in analogy to the 12 parts of the zodiac. When Gary first rolled the ball on the paper, only the dots nearest the equator hit the paper, and most of the paper was blank. They repositioned then the zodiacal band, the rubber band equator at a lesser angle from the painted zodiacal band, and then a few more dots will hit the paper. You'll see this in the video. Exclaiming that it made sense, Summer with a pencil drew in the missing parts of the curve. After they had done this activity, Summer reflected on it with the astrolabe next to her that we had discussed before. And she wondered, you'll hear her say, did the people who invented the astrolabe and the people who wrote Sacrobosco's book believe that the sun moves and not the earth? Her contemplation, her asking this question herself, reveals the depth to which these investigations move her thinking as she comes to experience and express the historical perspective that differs from hers. Extending that perspective taking to the solar system, Gary then wondered, and you'll see this on the video, what if we made 8 astrolabes, one for each planet? And you'll see him go on to wonder about the scale of the solar system in the universe. So, are we going to play it from here or from the other one? And that's here? No. It's here.
Rotating, almost like a satellite. I thought about today as we were drawing this, astronomical.
Well, that gave me the idea.
Is it?
You saw the hand and turning that stick, and we could try to make that.
A styrofoam ball, perfect. You can almost like recreate the two images with the path of the sun on here. If you put ink on here and then rolled it,
Rubber bands.
Let's try this.
Oh, we have oil paint.
You can try like different colors and different,
Okay.
just to see like the pattern.
We're kind of moving the sun around the earth. If we roll it across, we might actually have a 4-year.
Oh wow, did you see that? Ew.
I'm just theorizing. This is going to represent our spring equinox, and then June 21st. Now imagine, what if you made the band even more angled? I was actually surprised when we looked at that globe last week. I didn't realize the Earth was tilted that much.
Imagine you do like 12. Beautiful, look at it, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
For you to be the god this time.
Okay.
How come it's not?
Oh.
Some of them didn't hit.
Too high?
Actually
Just
makes
look
sense.
how low.
Did you just think when they invented this, or when they wrote the books, they thought that the sun moves and the earth does not move?
That's, yeah.
Wow. And
Interesting project to make 8 astrolabes, one for each planet. I'd like to give that a try.
one for each planet.
Yeah. You could sell it to NASA. The North Star guides us. Does the North Star guide Martians also?
I guess
Or
that's
maybe the
really
universe
bad.
is so big, the North Star is the North Star. Maybe that's so negligible compared to the distance of the North Star that we could still use the North Star on Mars.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah. In which case, would the astrolabes be all identical?
In this example, the student's curiosity with the Sacrobosco diagrams opened into recreating history and their own understandings of it and the universe. Further investigations interweaving space and history, experience and observation in our class, including observing daytime moonrise, exploring historical and current climate data as projected on this large sphere globe, viewing historical papers in the Rare Book Library, and then marbling paper themselves. There's no real sound here.
Where's it going?
From the proposal during the Sacrobosco, what happened? From the activity where you saw Gary at the end of the activity proposing the idea of making 8 astrolabes, one for every planet, Gary went on to construct the astrolabe geometry by hand for each planet, and then he coded and designed the tympanum for 8 astrolabes shown here on the top. For each planet, they were different. A project that surprised everyone. Now, my second example involves philosophy and investigation, and it will excerpt from the class's ongoing discussion of John Dewey's writing. On this particular day, which was several weeks later than what you just saw, the same passage, the same sentence was selected for reading aloud by Dima, a teacher at a Waldorf school who joined us that day, and Gary. In this passage, Dewey identified a role for education in education has a role, Dewey said, in developing personal initiative, which is essential to a democratic society. The undoing of walls between people, for John Dewey, is inseparable from the deep and philosophical work of integrating mind and body, thought and experience. To do this work as education, the learners must be the ones who are observing and inferring the relationships in science. As learners engage relationally with the world, Dewey says they become aware of uncertainty, instability, risk, and learners are to be encouraged in investigating. During this discussion, which you'll see in the video, each classmate spoke from a compelling personal experience where they integrated mind and body. Gary thrilled to what was in Dewey's text, the example of a child flying a kite. Dima spoke of the synchrony that emerges when she's dancing with another dancer. And the violinist in our class, TJ, will speak, you'll hear him, about the upwelling sound when an orchestra tunes at the beginning of a concert. And student Summer reflects, allow yourself to arrive in an experience. As I heard the students give these examples, again it came to me the idea that for the remainder of our class, let's try to create one of these mind-body interconnecting relational experiences. But I had nothing in mind when I proposed that. However, Gary immediately asked for a fan, and he wanted to try indoor kiting. As I went off to get a fan and some light materials, Gary sketched on the blackboard. He proposed that the fan's effect of the blowing of the fan would be related to its distance from something, although he exclaimed, I don't know how it works. And then in the video, you'll see that the fan is on the floor, unplugged, and Dima is moving around. She's the dancer, and she's demonstrating that she thinks the effect of the fan will be gradually less. The further away you get from it, it won't be sudden all at once. Then they turn on the fan, and Dima confirms her hunch. A blue paper that she holds near the fan was horizontal, and when she moves away from the fan, it droops down. And then there was this flimsy mylar that they found among the things that I brought them. It astonished everybody. On releasing it before the fan, It traveled, fluttered, and even seemed to hang in place. Exclaiming with awe, everybody was perturbed in their thinking. Was the behavior of the mylar measurable? While Gary persisted with his distance effect theory, Dima advocates that there's greater complexity going on. She says it changes as it moves. And then, repositioning the fan, it was sideways to begin with. Now the fan is pointing vertically. Gary addresses his emerging questioning about pitting the fan effect against gravity. And now the mylar sailed to the ceiling and lodged up there. A new improvisational research into the mylar's behavior, this stuff, ensued to try to get it back. You'll see in the video. Amid celebration of the mylar's final descent from the ceiling, I invited the class to reflect on their experimenting as a way of intermingling experience and reflection in Dewey's writing.
Democracy, the necessity to eliminate the walls between.
Society which is mobile would learn how to think about it.
To be almost like a feedback loop, sort of, and the two of them combined, because they have to be joined also in order for there to be learning. I just want to go fly a kite today. That sensory sort of experience.
It's about contact with other bodies and to kind of feel where the body is.
Just before the orchestra starts, this wave swells out from the middle. It's amazing when you're right there in the middle.
Allow yourself to alive.
Reflecting on and describing about doing something together.
To do today.
Yeah.
Do you have any big fans?
We do have a fan
Interior kite.
today.
Wow.
Measure here, F1, right? And we measure out here at F2. What's the relationship? Because I don't know, you know.
How do you measure it? Walking through it just becomes decreases slowly until and then decreases. How do you turn it in on first? Go up. It's hard
Wow.
to measure.
Maybe if you just drop it.
Of this fan. Wow!
Oh, it's magic!
Wow. Got a life of its own. Gonna measure the. Wow.
Let's try an experiment then. If we drop it here, let's see how far it goes. And then let's drop it here and see how far it goes.
Wow. Let me get the roller so we can. Yeah. It's like maybe while it's flying, it changes the movement, and so try it in the same place several times.
It's in Canada! Oh, I got another idea.
When it goes up,
Yep.
then we should turn it off.
Did you lose it?
Yeah! Back!
Walk to it.
He came back!
Few thoughts, this activity as a response to Dewey, and
Of experience and reflection, and the best part was the results were something I don't think anybody ever expected.
In these examples, passages of history and philosophy came to life through students' openness in acting on personal and collective curiosity. Learners' personal reflections coordinated multiple perspectives in relation with the universe, including Summer's arrival in meeting the ancient people's geocentrism and Gary's construction of 8 planetary astrolabes. Learners' differing perspectives deepened collective experimenting that they all did, such as Summer's idea to paint the ball in parts, first in 4 parts and then in 12, and Dima's attention to the mylar's changing shape. And the diversity among the experiences of the mind-body synchrony that ranged in their discussion from kite flying to the dancer to the orchestra's tuning. History and philosophy as works of life are ongoing through us taking up those works into investigative experiences of reflection and community. In reflecting on these experiences, Summer, an education student, agreed with Dewey, who said that education can kill curiosity, but also, Dewey said, there is an alternative. Education can welcome curiosity. Curiosity reciprocates educators' trust. Trust in learners' questions, taking them into the unknown, places of learning, together with historical thinkers and investigators. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your talk. It's always a pleasure to see your kids playing. And I wonder, who are these students, and are they engaged in which courses? And I would like you to explain a little bit more about the context of these students.
The course is a seminar that is open to undergraduate and graduate students. It's not part of a degree program. They're doing it by choice. And students might be, undergraduates might be in any field, engineering. I never had students from history, but economics, different forms of the sciences. And graduate students take the course. They might be engineers. They might be in other fields, and also it's available to students at Harvard who were in the education school. So in this particular semester, there were they were all graduate students. There were no undergraduates this time, but other times there are. And there were 2 educators from Harvard. One was a preschool teacher, you didn't see her today, and Summer, who didn't specify what she was going to be teaching. There was Gary, who figured in the experiments, and he was at a more advanced level. It was called advanced study, but not a degree program. And there was TJ, who was a master's program in science writing. I also am open to people coming who want to have the class experience, who aren't enrolled. And by the end of this semester, these, as you might have seen in the paper marbling thing, these people invited friends. So we had quite a few additional students by the end. Yeah.
And are you aware of similar experiences in large scale with, for instance, school teachers or in-service teachers? Or have you ever tried working with this methodology in larger groups?
This summer, I did a program at Puebla, Mexico, where there were 60 teachers. We had the barrier of the language, so there was a translator, and I gave a brief introduction to the historical context, which was the ancient mirrors of the Mesoamerican peoples. They made mirrors out of stone, ground stone, the way we might make mirrors by glass, and polished them highly. And these mirrors reflect in ways so that you can also burn the sun. And also they made flat mirrors to see your face, also out of stone. So I brought a lot of materials, and I had some activities. I had 2 days with the teachers, and the first day only flat mirrors, and I gave them only little mirrors, 1-inch square mirrors, and some questions. And they worked in groups, and they were wonderful. And the second day I had them work with curved mirrors and make flexible things into mirrors. So yeah, that was great.
Maria Elise from University of São Paulo. It's always a pleasure to hear you and to see how you can combine so many different things in the science class: philosophy, history, science itself, and mainly art. It's always there, yeah. But I would like to ask you something similar to Sibel, but regarding if you have information of what happened with these students that made your course. If do you know if they applied this methodology in their work as engineers or in their work as teachers? Do they tell you something about that? What they do outside the class with all this experience?
Yeah, I do keep in contact with many of the students afterwards. And for example, that I'm giving this presentation today, I sent it to them so that those who were in it could see it. So I keep some kind of dialogue with many of the students after the class. There was one student who was an undergraduate. She was a freshman in 2013, and she wanted to go into chemistry, and she was having a tough time in the first year at school. And she took this class with me in the middle of that first year, and she became able to be curious, and that curiosity carried her into being a successful student of chemistry where she was thinking about dropping out of school. So that was a great example from an undergraduate. Some of the graduate students in teaching have included some form of exploration in the teaching that they have gone on to do, and they communicate with me about that. And some of them have gone on to do at Harvard dissertation studies that I have been in some way a part of. So that's just like brief. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks.
Someone else? Breno.
Hi, Breno from UFABC. Elizabeth, well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. One of the things that you mentioned was the moment that students got in touch with with Sakura Bosco's book, right? They touched the book and so on. And this is one of the things that us here in Brazil, we do not have the chance to do, because I think that we might have some copies of that book in the National Library, but we do not have access to this kind of original material. So, two questions. Do you think that this was crucial for the engagement of these students, or one of the crucial things for the engagement of these students? And how was the experience in Mexico that you mentioned? Did you have like some original book or material that they could be in touch?
Yeah, in Mexico I did not have, I myself have never seen these mirrors. So I showed photographs, I described a little bit the modern method of grinding, and I provided materials, glass and abrasive grit, and some of them tried to make these shapes, grinding them themselves. So the teachers were able to get engaged, especially with the reflective effects, the mirror, and the bringing their curiosity to it, although we didn't have the authentic materials there. I think that the experience with it kind of relates to one of Bailey's examples, where she talked about recreating experiments with materials that we have around us today, but they're historical experiences. And that's a way that can get us to connect with the historical outlook and our own, put those in dialogue, even if we don't have the authentic pieces of paper. And some things are especially evocative that way, although I didn't talk about it today. The night sky, the moon, the sun, shadows, those were amazing to historical people. Our students haven't ever paid attention to it, and they can connect and become excited. So I think there are ways around it. And then you saw that I used the digital versions of the Sacra Bosco. Once we left the library, they couldn't have remembered what those things looked like, so we used the digital pictures to help us. So I think there's ways to make connections. Thank you.
Well, another thing that I liked a lot in your presentation today, I don't remember if I saw this in the last one, but it was the work with Dewey and Piaget original works in pedagogy and psychology. Because when I'm used to use modern, present pedagogical or psychological texts with students. So I'm wondering how was the impact for these students to dialogue with Dewey? If there is something, I know that there are some general points that we can still think about, but they are not so linked with the classroom reality from nowadays. So I never thought about working with this pedagogical ancient texts. So I would like to ancient because 1916. How was this experience for them?
So a couple of the historical philosophy and psychology texts that we read were from the 20th century, but a while ago. And how was it for the students to interact with these? The language was difficult for them. And I started from the very first class to give them assignments with John Dewey. And this group, the very previous semester, there were students in it that really wanted to read John Dewey, and they pushed it further, and I kept giving them more and more advanced readings. But this group was finding the historical language, early 20th century language, a barrier, and they would keep putting it off. Oh, we'll talk about John Dewey next time. And then they realized they better do it. So they came up with this plan each of them was going to give a report to the class on some chapter, because by then we had piled up a bunch of chapters that we had supposedly read but not discussed. So we had a class where each of them gave a presentation on their Dewey chapter. I still felt that we hadn't gotten further enough, so then I would take a page out of John Dewey and Xerox it and have us all read that together in class and talk about just that one page, see if we could get somewhere with that. In this group that you saw us with, we were meeting during a spring break. We had an extra student there, the dancer, and the dancer did the reading, actually. And they started off with taking a sentence, and the two of them chose the same sentence to read aloud. So that was something with Piaget. One of the things I did was to Xerox and have us read together one page of Piaget. It's so difficult. We just worked on that one page. And then I assigned a chapter, and the chapter was the child doing the catapult. Because I don't know if you saw one of my slides, I had them doing we had a trebuchet that was made by a previous student. This is a launching catapult machine, and we used it to throw snowballs out in the courtyard. So the day after that, I showed them the Piaget, where Piaget has the child use a simpler catapult. And one of the students developed his own version of the child's balance experiments, balance catapult. So we kind of followed the Piaget child by our own struggles with the apparatus. So those are some things where we tried. But the language was hard, and we had to try it in multiple ways. Another thing they did with Galileo was they read it out loud, and they assigned Galileo as a dialogue, and they assigned different parts. But then they got into struggles because even they're reading it aloud, it's still difficult.
Someone else? Okay. Thank you, Professor.